helps them to be able to call me, to be with that family so that they can get on with the many tasks that they have to do. So I think it's comforting for them to have a chaplain there to take care of their family that they've come to love and know.
That was great.
Probably not 10 minutes.
I wasn't counting. Thank you. Okay.
So I'm very excited to talk with you about mindfulness. And my name is Peter Lewis. I think it's one of the most important skills we need in order to be human. And it's also one of the most commonly misunderstood and misapplied skills. So my background in terms of why am I here to talk with you about mindfulness is that I spent about 10 years in a monastery, 11 years. And you can think of that as I spent that time practicing mindfulness, trying to figure out from the inside, what is it, how do you apply it, going down all these rabbit holes that were not really mindfulness. And then I spent 11 years, I'm a clinical psychologist by profession now. I work for the Air Force. And that time is spent learning how to talk about mindfulness, how to communicate those experiences to other people. So let's talk a little bit about why it's misunderstood. Mindfulness tends to be viewed in two ways. And usually you have this sense of what we talk about as mindfulness now, where you come in and I'm going to talk with you about mindfulness. Ding. Pay attention to your breathing. Breathe quietly and softly. So there's this mindfulness approach where it is used in almost everything. You can sell your favorite skin lotion. You can use it's great for growing hair in your chest. So mindfulness is applied to everything, and it loses what its real connection is. And the first issue here with the misunderstanding of mindfulness is that it's looking at an end state and not at the process itself. So it's saying mindfulness is when and it adds all these other things to it. The really big problem with that is often when we start to become mindful, we become aware of our lives as they are. And we are encountering things about ourselves that may not be so pleasant. And yet what we're sold as mindfulness is something that is very comforting and pleasant and enjoyable. And then we feel this disconnect and we assume, I must not be practicing mindfulness. That's not the case. The second issue with mindfulness is how it's presented in the common culture is that it's presented with this idea of relaxation. So that when you become mindful, you're calm and tranquil and relaxed and slowly anesthetized, that your senses dull. You stop becoming aware, you sort of turn inward and you stop becoming aware of what's going on around you. And that's a really big problem for almost all of us, especially if you work with people who are trauma victims. The roots of mindfulness are, the word itself, sati, is taken from the Sanskrit and it's from the Buddhist Eightfold Path. It's one of those elements of the Eightfold Path, and it has a particular practice in Buddhism. In the Christian tradition, the analog to that is watchfulness. And there are a series of early spiritual writers called the Neptic Fathers, or sometimes it's referred to as sobriety, and it refers to that process of inner awareness, inner attention. In the practice of mindfulness, let's talk a little bit about how we can work with it. In the practice of mindfulness, the usual approach is to pay attention to the breath. Now, you don't actually have to use breath as the source for your practice of mindfulness. There are a lot of different focal points that you can use. Some people will use prayer rope. They can use that. They can use a candle. They can use an object, like a picture of somebody that they love. They can use a point on the wall. They can use external sound. But it needs to be something that's continuous. And the purpose of this is that it is an anchor to your attention. So the mindfulness practice, if you think of it as a bridge between two meditative practices. You have on the one hand open-ended meditation, vipassana, where you're trying to remain open to all experience, not filtering anything whatsoever. And then on the other hand, you have concentrative meditation, where you're envisioning it like a mandala, and you're excluding all other thought, and you're trying to just keep your thought anchored in one thing. And mindfulness is really is right in between those two, where you anchor your consciousness on one object, and typically it's your breathing, but you don't do it to the point of excluding other thoughts. You allow other thoughts to come up. And why is that? Well, the biggest problem that we all face in our lives is experiential avoidance. We tend not to pay attention to the things that are unpleasant, that we don't like about ourselves, that we don't like about the world, that we find threatening. And those are the things that usually undermine us. And by nature, if it's something that is that threatening, how do you become aware of it? Because you're always excluding it from your attention. And that's the purpose of a mindfulness practice, is that you anchor your attention on a single thing. And it's sort of like fishing. It's like you cast your line out there, you have your fishing pole, and you wait to see what you capture on that. And that's what the mindfulness practice does. It's not something that's so complex that it involves your rational mind to the exclusion of any other information, but it's something that allows your rational mind to be aware and awake, and then you let the other stuff kind of percolate and come through. So that's the practice of it. And then I think one of the other things that's important to think about with mindfulness practice is that in common culture now, we usually use it as an end, as a goal for like better health, better mental health, improved diet, improved exercise, and all those things can happen. Because when we come back to ourselves and we slow down and we start to really take stock of what's going on internally and what we're observing in the environment, we naturally shift to a way of being that's more pleasing to us. But we don't get there immediately by practicing mindfulness. And often we have to take stock when we're coming in of all the unpleasant stuff that's going on. And it's okay for that to be a little bit chaotic, a little bit upsetting, a little bit annoying, to experience parts of ourselves that we were not intending to encounter, that end up arising within us. And in the process of that, then they often get resolved, but the first part of it is coming into contact with those hard edges of reality that we usually don't want to see. And so if you can take out the end goal of saying, like, I'm going to practice mindfulness in order to get healthy, I'm going to take out the practice of mindfulness in order to sleep better, I'm going to take out mindfulness in order to, if we disconnect that, we actually have a better chance of practicing mindfulness, because we're not adding our expectations in about what it is and how we're supposed to use it. And in the original context, if you look again at the Eightfold Path and how mindfulness is used in there, it's used as an antidote. And this is a very interesting phrase. It's used as an antidote to, it's not to ill health. Think about the Noble Eightfold Path. It's used as an antidote to, it's not to mental well-being, well, kind of, sort of. It's not used as an antidote to annoying neighbors. It's not used as an antidote to putting up with coworkers. It's not used as an antidote to dealing with injustice in the world. It's used as an antidote to delusion. So it's very interesting, you think about that. It's an antidote to delusion. If you're practicing mindfulness, you're becoming more aware of who you are, where you are in the world, and often when it's misapplied, it's used as a way to adjust people to reality that may be unhealthy, that may be just sort of, you think about like somebody that I was just talking to the other day who he is an African American man in maintenance group, and he thinks that he's being unjustly treated by, and for right reason, when he goes through all his story, I won't share the whole thing with you, but he thinks that he's being unjustly treated. And he comes into me, he says, I want help coping with it. I said, well, is that really the right thing for me to do with you, to help you cope better with a situation that's unjust? Is the better thing for you to do is to go to the EEO to file a military equal opportunity complaint and address it rather than accommodate you to the situation? And that's where mindfulness often gets misapplied, because it gets people to be more comfortable with situations that they may actually be better off confronting and dealing with, even if they cause distress and annoyance and heartache. So mindfulness is great. I encourage you all to apply it. There are a lot of different ways that you can start a mindfulness practice. The most common one is meditation. Usually when I refer people to practices, I will mention Headspace. There's an app that's put out by Andy Puttycombe. He was a Tibetan Buddhist. What I really like about his app is that he kind of breaks down mindfulness meditation and helps guide you through it in a way that he gradually removes prompts from the guided meditation, so that it makes you more comfortable spending time with yourself. And then there are also, my wife's very fond of Calm. There are, of course, you can practice mindfulness on your own. You don't have to get a teacher for it. It's inherent in our human condition to be mindful. And but it is really useful when you're looking at developing mindfulness to think of it as a three-stage process, so that you begin with having a mindful practice. And if you practice mindfulness, it tends to develop a mindful state. So if anybody spends time with themselves